Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Max Verstappen wins the sprint race for the Belgian Grand Prix, but an especially dramatic day for Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton and George Russell almost colliding again in qualifying here for the sprint shootout as it was this time round. What is Russell playing at? What exactly was going on in the Mercedes garage to allow this to occur? And more drama later in the day with the sprint race itself, with Hamilton getting a controversial penalty to say the least for an incident with Sergio Perez. Who's right, who's wrong? We're going to dive into everything today. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, and also just a word of positivity. If any of you feel useless in life, like you're not contributing anything to society, just remember the wet tyre exists in Formula 1, and today was another great example. So the sprint shootout got delays because it was raining, okay, whatever, but they've done it again and again now, and it was such a weird session because once they finally got underway 35 minutes later than intended, in the second set of sprint qualifying, they did not declare it a wet session, which effectively meant that if you wanted to use dry tyres, you had to use the mediums, as would have been the case if it was a dry session. So you're allowed to use your inters, your wets, whatever, which of course they did, but Stroll decided to put the slicks on, but he was only allowed to use mediums, because the FIA had deliberately decided they weren't going to allow anyone to use softs, so if you wanted to go slicks, you had to go mediums, which is arguably a little bit dangerous. No, but apparently that doesn't matter in some of these contexts, and we'll see that later today with some of the pit stops that were going down as well. So yeah, Hulkenberg, another disaster class from Haas. Somehow they didn't get him out in time. He couldn't even do a flying lap, which is a bit of a shambles. And also the red flag because of Stroll shunting meant that Alonso got knocked out in SQ2, and then SQ3 was a complete mess. The fight for pole position in the sprint was very much alive here with the Ferrari, the McLaren of Oscar Piastri. And I know that yesterday we mentioned that Piastri was doing well, but Norris did get some damage right from his floor. So it was like, okay, I know a couple of guys mentioned that maybe Piastri wasn't as quick as he looked, but actually it turns out he was as quick as he looked. And even Hamilton was up there as well, and was very competitive with Verstappen. Verstappen didn't seem 100% comfortable, and yeah, in those kind of changeable conditions, it feels like the Red Bull, especially in qualifying, isn't as good as it is in the race, as we saw later in the day. But then it was an absolute mess. So Perez was weaving through traffic to finish his flying lap as all of the cars get ready to go for theirs. And this was George Russell's POV. So this is Lewis Hamilton right in front of him here in the bus stop chicane, and apparently Russell was getting told in his ear that they were running out of time. They had no time really to go. They had to go right now to start their lap, or the session was going to end, and they wouldn't get the best drying track conditions. So Russell decides, despite the fact that his teammate is in front of him and queuing up to start his lap, Russell just bombs it round the outside of Hamilton. Just, yeah, don't care about you, mate. I'm starting my lap right now. And off he goes to begin his lap, with Hamilton right behind, also pushing because Mercedes had told them both they needed to get on with it. So here we go into turn one, into La Source, and Russell has a massive lockup, and Hamilton's coming up behind him and is like, well, you know, surely Russell's just going to yield now and says, all right, I messed up my lap, whatever, like, let Hamilton get on with his lap. But no, that's not what happens, and Russell pretty much just parks his car on the racing line, blocks Hamilton all the way up Eau Rouge into Radion, and then even at the top of Radion, gets right, I mean, look how close they get. It's like Spain version 2, is it not? When we saw them collide earlier this year with supposed Mercedes communication issues, Hamilton eventually pulls out to the right-hand side and gets him with that better kind of, well, lower downforce rear wing, let's say. But that was his lap ruined. That was Russell's lap ruined. And yeah, that was not enough for them to, either of them, get where they should have been with that competitive car on the day, at least in qualifying. So Hamilton ends up P7, and it was Russell P10. Verstappen takes pole by a fraction. Oscar Piastri missed out by 11 thousandths of a second, just 100th of a second behind. He was actually up a lot in the middle sector, but because he has a barn door on the back of his car, Verstappen got him basically going into turn, well, all the way down to the bus stop chicane and on the run to the line. So incredible stuff from Piastri, it's got to be said. And Mercedes and Hamilton understandably not happy with this one. As Hamilton said, not happy about it. Obviously, I was looking great at the end. I reckon I could have been first or second in that session, and it felt like the car and Hamilton had the pace. With George, yeah, he didn't really want to comment on it. The car felt great, or at least he felt great in the car in all conditions. And Russell goes on to say, yeah, don't know how to explain it, and absolutely, you know, shit show, he says, from start to finish, especially from my side. Don't know what he was doing. Now, Mercedes, Hamilton was clearly annoyed, and Russell was saying, yeah, like, I had a really bad weekend. Now, Mercedes pretty much eventually said, well, it was communication. We told them they had to go, they had a bit more time, they didn't, but still, I don't know what George is doing there, right? When you mess up your lap like that, you know that Hamilton's behind you because you've literally just overtaken him and seen him right there in the bus stop chicane and deliberately made the choice to go ahead of him. And then you just ruin his lap anyway. I just don't understand what was going through Russell's head at that point. And even Toto Wolff said that if he wasn't impeded by his own teammate, which is pretty rare that you see impeding instances like this, that Lewis's pace would have been enough for P1. And the car was definitely there. Like the fact that McLaren was where they were and the Ferraris were fractions off. So Verstappen gets pole by a fraction. Sainz was only just behind as well. Then Leclerc, then Norris, Gasly. And then, because of course, if Hamilton was ahead of Gasly, the sprint race later in the day might have looked very different as well. So that was the qualification positions for the sprints. And the sprints did eventually begin, but the same again from the FIA here. They waited so long. I don't understand why they bother with these wet tyres. Now, I know there were issues with this, like, you know, burst drain or whatever at the bottom of Radion. So, you know, they wanted to delay it a little bit. But I don't really understand why. And Hamilton was like, are they not just better off cracking on right now? Because the car and the track was clearly drivable, but they did like 4 or 5 laps behind the safety car, which were technically formation laps, and then they just reduced the length of the sprint to compensate for the fact that they don't have the fuel to run the entire sprints if they're doing all the formation laps. So, like, yeah, there was a lot of water on the track, but still, these are the best drivers in the world, and from the very beginning of the race, the Inter was the preferable tyre. So, like, what's the point even having these wet tyres? Like, Verstappen would have pitted if he could have done, and we'll get into why he didn't here in a second. So the race begins, and Verstappen's away and gone, Piastri's right behind, and everyone comes flooding into the pit. And it was similar to what Mercedes thought in Hungary 2021 when Hamilton was the only man on the grid, is because if you've got the first pit box, which Red Bull currently do, and you come into the pits, you will get held up by every other car coming past you. So Red Bull made the correct strategic call to say, you know what, Max, just do 1 lap on the wets, really push it as hard as you can, and hopefully we don't get undercut too hard by the clearly faster Inters, despite the fact that it was a rolling start under a safety car. Whatever. FIA will do FIA things, at least all the drivers are safe, which I suppose is the priority here. Complete mess of a pit lane, of course. Loads of incidents which I thought were unsafe releases, but I'm not really sure they're looking into them because there were so many of them. So Verstappen, like, puts in an absolutely stonking outlap here, and Piastri leads for this lap. Verstappen comes into the pits 1 lap later, gets undercut marginally by Piastri, but Verstappen put like 4 seconds on Leclerc in 1 lap. It was actually absurd how hard he was pushing there on tyres that weren't the fastest, and Verstappen holds on to P2, which is, you know, that's going to be enough to win the race for Verstappen, but Piastri leading, I mean, what a great job that he did. So eventually all the cars come in, they filter out, and there are a few other instances to note, and then we got Alonso coming, well, a cropper here, out of Puon, and he spins it out. He's very lucky to not actually smash his car up. He just about escapes from getting into the wall. But yeah, Alonso on his birthday. It's kind of funny, like, I don't believe Alonso, despite all his incredible years in Formula 1, I don't think he's ever won around Spa, a circuit that's always been a bit of a bogey circuit for him, and continues today on the day that he turns 42. Then the safety car restart happens, and when you're doing a safety car restart at Spa against a car which has high straight line speed, when you're running a barn door rear wing, which Piastri was, you basically have no chance. It's just the way the circuit is designed. The run down into Eau Rouge and Radion and then up the Kemmel Straight. Piastri was just cooked. I think there was no real way that he was going to hold on here to the lead. Maybe he could have timed his safety car restart a little bit better, but I don't think it would have mattered that much. And Max had more pace anyway. Like, he pulled a 7-second gap in like 5 or 6 laps. So, you know, we already know what's going to happen tomorrow unless there's anything crazy. But Piastri did really well, even to hold on to where he did. And then we get into the Hamilton Perez incident. Perez was looking quick in the early stints, was pressuring Gasly to get past into P3, and then for whatever reason, coming out of the final part of Sector 2, Perez dropped back a bit. He had a poor couple of corners coming into Stavlo 1, and Hamilton smelt blood in the water, and got a great drive at the end of Sector 2, and was right alongside and arguably ahead of Perez going into this corner. This is not a corner where overtaking is done, especially in Formula 1 with these massive cars, especially in wet conditions. But Hamilton was ahead at the apex of this corner. Arguably, this is his corner. And, you know, well, at least if he wasn't ahead, he was certainly alongside, or like pretty much direct. I mean, this is the image. We'll see some more here in a second. So they're going side by side at this point, and then there's contact. So Hamilton, understandably, carrying a lot of speed, is going to run a bit wide. Perez to be honest, doesn't use all of the track. This is how I see it anyway. You guys might disagree. But they do collide. Hamilton did understeer into Perez. But Perez didn't use all the track. If he'd have wanted to go all the way, I think there would have been enough room to get both of them through, but Perez doesn't go. I'm not saying it's Perez's fault, but he doesn't use all of the track here, and Hamilton kind of has nowhere to go. So this is the this is the onboard, right? So coming out of the final corner before the run down to the bus stop chicane, and Hamilton gets a great drive out of this corner, is alongside, if not at the apex of this corner. I mean, is he ahead at this point? I guess you guys can be the judge of that, but it's definitely there or thereabouts, and this is probably his corner. Now, he cuts a little bit of the inside curb, understeers a bit out to the left-hand side, and then they make contact with Perez around about here. Now, if you look at Hamilton's line, he would have kept it on the track. Would he have run Perez out of road? Maybe. But maybe there was some more space for Perez to leave again on the inside. And you can argue that really at this point, Perez should just be getting out of the way here. Like, yes, he doesn't want to lose the position to the Mercedes, but arguably this is Hamilton's corner at this point. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting one. And to be honest, I think almost for sure this would not have been penalised had Perez not got damage. But Perez gets damage, is then eaten up by the Ferraris in the coming corners and then retires from the race. And then Hamilton gets the penalty. And I am of the opinion that the FIA do this way too often nowadays, that they will look at the consequences of an incident rather than the actual merit of the incident itself, because this to me is a racing incident, right? Like, it's tricky going too wide through there when you're on inters, and you can look at both drivers could have done something different, but I don't know, my read on it is that this wouldn't have been punished as it was with a 5-second penalty if Perez didn't have the hole in his side pod. If Perez wasn't damaged and he continued fine and either stayed ahead of Hamilton or lost the position and still carried on for the rest of the race, I don't think they give a penalty. But because he gets damaged, they give him a penalty. That's how I read it, and that should not be how it is. Like, the penalty should not be given out based on the consequences. They should be given out on the merits of the incident themselves. If someone was to force another driver completely off track, but that other driver yields, gets out of the way, and then comes back on, that incident might well be penalty worthy, but because that driver yielded and got out of the way, they therefore, the driver that maybe made the infringement doesn't get any penalty, because that's how apparently the FIA do things nowadays. So I think this is very controversial. I think you can kind of look at it either way. Like, I think you can certainly see why it might be a penalty, but I'm not convinced that it was personally. The end of the sprint finishes like this though. Verstappen wins by a mile, then Piastri, then Gasly holds on for P3 over Hamilton, and Hamilton dropped down from 4th down to 7th behind the two Ferraris based on the penalty that he got, and he was only a 10th ahead of Russell, who made a bit of a fight back through the field. Great performance by Gasly as well, by the way, to hold on as he did, because it looked like he was going to get eaten up by Perez and then Hamilton, but he managed to hold on emphatically.
He was pretty slow, and he went wide out slow through 14, and I got a great exit. It's more than a car, like half a car, more than half a car ahead of, alongside him, and we just ended up coming together. I think it was just a bit of a racing incident, really. Naturally, it wasn't intentional, but they saw it differently. So, it was very, very tricky conditions out there, so we were all trying our best, but anyways, it doesn't really make a huge difference. 4th or 7th in sprint race where you don't get a lot of points. It's not the biggest, it's not the worst thing in the world.
So this is the reaction we have so far. Toto Wolff says the penalty against Hamilton was very harsh, especially considering the track conditions. Of course, he is going to say that, and Red Bull are going to say that the penalty was probably needed to be much significantly worse than it was. But yeah, it doesn't seem like Mercedes are going to put in a protest or anything, even though they could probably look back at other previous 5-second penalties or penalties that weren't given and actually say to the FIA, look, you've judged these instances differently over time, but they might not bother, and we'll just focus on the main race tomorrow. But very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.